Dubai, February 12, 2025. 3:14 a.m. While the trading world slept, the financial heart of one of the planet's largest exchanges, Bybit, stopped beating for a moment. There were no alarms. There were no panicked emails. The state-of-the-art firewalls detected nothing suspicious. However, deep within the Ethereum blockchain, a silent massacre was unfolding. In less than 60 seconds, the company's hot wallets, protected by the most expensive security layers on the market, began to bleed money. 10 million, 100 million, 500 million, until reaching the astronomical figure of $1.5 billion. This was no ordinary hack. It was a masterpiece of digital espionage. Today, on Focal Suspect, we're going to break down the most in-depth investigation to date into the Bybit heist. We'll dive into the malicious code that no one saw, uncover the identity of the ghost employee, and reveal how North Korea's Lazarus Group achieved the impossible, hacking the very fabric of a corporation. Brace yourself, because after this, you'll never look at your cryptocurrencies the same way again. To understand how $1.5 billion was stolen, we must look inward, not outward. The investigation by the FBI and Chainalysis revealed something disturbing. The attack began 14 months before a single cent was moved. In January 2024, Bybit hired a senior developer named James V. His resume was impeccable. He had worked on DeFi projects in Europe, and his identity was verified by a recruitment agency in Argentina. James was productive, brilliant, and extremely quiet. He earned the trust of the infrastructure team, eventually gaining access to the exchange's critical authentication libraries. But James V didn't exist. He was a deepfake identity created by the Lazarus Group. What few people know is that his Argentine passport belonged to a real person who had never left a small town in Patagonia, whose identity had been stolen years earlier in a massive data breach. James, or whoever was behind that screen in Pyongyang, did not install a traditional virus. He did something much more subtle. For months, he contributed legitimate and useful code to the company. He became an indispensable cog in the machine. He was waiting for the right moment to inject the poison. This is where we get into the technical details that most media outlets overlooked. The method used is known as dependency confusion. Bybit, like almost all major tech companies, uses package managers for its software. James V knew that Bybit used a private internal library called auth verify v4.js. This library was not in the public GitHub repositories, it was exclusive to the company. The plan was diabolical. Lazarus created a library with the exact same name but in a public NPM repository, and assigned it a higher version number, version 4.0.1. When Bybit servers performed an automatic maintenance update, the system detected a newer version outside the company and, due to a configuration error, downloaded and installed it. This malicious script had a hidden function that only activated under a specific condition, a signal sent from an Amazon cloud server that appeared to be legitimate data analytics traffic. The script did not steal user passwords. Its sole purpose was to collect fragments of the private keys that sign the exchange's transactions. Every time a user made a legitimate withdrawal, the script saved a piece of the key. By February 2025, Lazarus had the complete puzzle. They had the keys to the kingdom. For hours, the world wondered how a powerhouse like Bybit could have fallen so quickly. It was the company's co-founder, Ben Zhou, who broke the silence by sharing the analysis of the root transaction. And what he revealed left the cybersecurity community in shock. It wasn't an undetectable, zero-day vulnerability, it was a technical oversight that Lazarus exploited with surgical precision. Upon analyzing the transaction, forensic investigators found the master key used by the attackers, a function called delegate call. In the world of Ethereum smart contracts, a delegate call is an extremely powerful and dangerous tool. It allows one contract to use the code of another contract while retaining the permissions of the original. In other words, Lazarus managed to get Bybit's security contract to grant administrator permissions to an external contract controlled by them. There were 3 critical red flags that, had they been detected in time, would have saved $1.5 billion. Hidden in the transaction input data, the destination address pointed to an unverified contract. Most suspiciously, that contract had been created just 3 days before the attack. It was a disposable contract, designed exclusively for this heist and intended to disappear afterward. In the operation code, the parameter was explicitly set to 1. Technically speaking, this triggers the delegate call. For any security auditor, 1 in that field is a red flag, a cry for help from the system. It's the digital equivalent of seeing someone walk into a bank wearing a mask and carrying an empty bag, and still letting them in. Lazarus was incredibly clever in camouflaging the data. At first glance, to automated monitoring systems, the transaction looked like a harmless, low-level transfer. However, beneath that mask of normality, the code was executing a massive looting instruction. Ben Zhou admitted that, despite the devastating impact, the technique wasn't particularly sophisticated. It was, in his own words, an exploitation of trust in the code. Lazarus didn't break down the door. They simply convinced the guard that they were the bank's owners using just a couple of lines of JavaScript and a 1 parameter that no one bothered to check. February 12, 3:14 a.m. The operation was launched. Lazarus didn't want to make small withdrawals to avoid raising suspicion. They knew that once they started, it would take the security team only minutes to react. So they decided that 1 minute was all they needed. They used what's called a flash loan attack as a distraction. They initiated a series of complex transactions on external DeFi protocols to flood Bybit's monitoring nodes with false arbitrage alerts. While the engineers on duty tried to figure out what was happening with those protocols, the master script inside Bybit executed 12 massive transfers. Most incredibly, and this is a detail that only forensic investigators detected months later, the script hacked the auditor's control panel in real time. The monitors showed that the wallet balances were intact. The hackers were feeding the system with fake data, shadow accounting. By the time the first on-site engineer noticed that the actual balance on the blockchain didn't match the monitor, 15 minutes had already passed. In the digital world, 15 minutes is an eternity. The $1.5 billion had already crossed 3 different digital borders. How do you make $1.5 billion disappear without the FBI catching you? This is where Lazarus proved why they are the world's best money launderers. They didn't use Bitcoin. Bitcoin is too traceable. They moved the stolen Ethereum to the Tron network using a decentralized bridge that they had set up months earlier with fake liquidity. Once on Tron, the money was fragmented across 50,000 different wallets controlled by AI bots. They used a technique called chain hopping. The money jumped from Ethereum to Solana, from Solana to Monero, the ultimate privacy coin, and from Monero back to Tron. With each jump, the trail became more blurred. But the masterstroke was the use of online casinos in Southeast Asia. Lazarus used thousands of automated accounts to bet that money on gambling games controlled by North Korean front companies. They deliberately lost money to the house, and in this way, the money left the casino as legitimate winnings. Clean. Impossible to seize. $1.5 billion converted into cash to fund the defense projects of one of the world's most isolated nations. How do we know it was Lazarus? Despite their perfection, they made a human error, a 0.5-second slip-up. During the cleanup phase of the malicious script code, one of the operators in Pyongyang forgot to activate his military-grade VPN. For half a second, the command and control server logged a direct connection from an IP address assigned to Kim Chaek University of Technology in North Korea. That small oversight allowed the FBI to connect the dots. The script code shared the same writing style and encryption functions used in the 2014 Sony hack and the 2022 Axie Infinity heist. Lazarus had returned, stronger, more patient, and much richer. Bybit had to be bailed out by a consortium of private investors to prevent the entire market from collapsing. But the question remains, if they were able to get in that way, who else is lurking on the servers of the exchanges we use today? The Bybit hack wasn't just a financial blow, it was a warning. It taught us that in 2025, total security is an illusion. That the enemy doesn't always try to break down your door. Sometimes, the enemy is the employee of the month sitting next to you, or the secure code your system automatically downloads. Lazarus is still out there, with an additional $1.5 billion in its pocket, perfecting its next attack. The digital Cold War never ended, it simply moved to the blockchain. I'm Focal Suspect. If you enjoyed this in-depth investigation, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you want to know just how deep the rabbit hole really goes, check out this video. Thanks for watching.